chilling silence descended, not the peaceful quiet of the mesa, but the heavy stillness of a world suddenly cracked open. His gaze, accustomed to the vast, indifferent stretch of the desert, now snagged on a pair of eyes too wide for her small face, brimming with an ancient, unbearable sorrow. "Please marry my mother, mister," the child had whispered, her voice barely a breath, yet it tore through the midday heat like a lightning bolt. "She's all I've got left." The words, simple as they were, coiled around his heart, a venomous serpent tightening its hold. He stood frozen, a lone figure dwarfed by the immense sky, feeling the weight of a plea he never sought, a burden he was ill-equipped to bear. His past, a jagged landscape of regret and unspoken truths, seemed to rise up, casting long, dark shadows over the present moment. The sun beat down, relentless, mirroring the relentless pressure building within him. Every beat of his heart felt like a hammer striking a brittle pane of glass, threatening to shatter the carefully constructed facade of his solitary existence. This fragile request, offered by a child whose world had already fractured, was not merely a request for a father, but a desperate cry against the encroaching darkness of an unforgiving world, a plea for a fragile beacon of hope amidst the encroaching shadows of despair. The air shimmered with an unspoken tension, an invisible weight pressing down, forcing him to confront not just the child's plea, but the very depths of his own complicated, scarred soul. This wasn't merely a request, it was an invocation, pulling him deeper into a current he had desperately fought to avoid, a river of human pain he believed he had long since navigated away from. It was a mirror, reflecting his own desolate landscape, daring him to look, to truly see. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The man, known only as Silas in these parts, if he was known at all, felt the arid wind whisper past his ears, carrying not sand, but the echo of that small, desperate voice. He had come to this desolate edge of the territory years ago, seeking nothing more than oblivion in the vastness, a place where the ghosts of his own past could not find him. Yet, here they were, embodied in a small girl with braids and eyes that held the universe's sorrow. His own hands, calloused and rough from years of solitude and hard labor, felt suddenly inadequate, clumsy. He thought of the fire that had consumed his own family years ago, a blaze that had stripped him bare, leaving behind only ash and a hollow cavity where his heart once beat. He remembered the shouts, the acrid smoke stinging his lungs, the agonizing helplessness. He remembered the pity in the eyes of the townsfolk, a pity that felt more like judgment, branding him as a man touched by tragedy, cursed. He had fled that gaze, those knowing whispers, seeking a place where no one knew his name, much less his history. The Zuni girl's plea was a cruel echo, a twist of the knife in an old, unhealed wound, forcing him to confront the very capacity for love and loss he had sworn off. The world, it seemed, would not let him merely fade into the landscape. It demanded a response, a reckoning. He turned slowly, his boots crunching on the sun-baked earth, the dust rising around his ankles like a restless spirit. The air itself felt thick with unspoken expectations, with the collective weight of the community's silent assessment. He saw the glances from the elder women, their faces etched with a history of hardship, their expressions unreadable, yet expectant. He saw the younger men, their eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and a subtle, almost imperceptible disdain, for a man who lived on the fringes, outside the intricate web of their traditions and obligations. This child, this small, persistent flicker of life, had inadvertently pulled him back into the human current, a tide he had fought so long and hard to escape. The silence between them stretched, taut as a bowstring, waiting for the arrow of his decision to fly. The immediate aftermath of the girl's plea was not a tempest of sound, but a deafening quiet that amplified every beat of Silas's heart, every rustle of the dry grasses. The very air around them seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of unspoken pleas and the judgment of unseen eyes. He could feel the collective gaze of the Zuni community, a silent jury assessing his character, weighing his worth against the vulnerability of the small family. His mind, usually a fortress against intrusion, was assailed by images, the flickering flames of a distant past, the faces of loved ones swallowed by fire, and the bitter taste of helplessness that still clung to his tongue like desert dust. He had chosen isolation, not out of malice, but from a profound fear of repetition, of loving and losing again. The girl, Luna, as he now knew her name to be, stood before him, a fragile sentinel of hope. Her mother, Elena, hovered slightly behind, her face a mask of weary dignity, her eyes dark and deep, mirroring the vast, empty sky above them, yet holding a flicker of resilience that surprised him. Elena was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but there was a raw, untamed beauty to her, like a desert flower blooming against all odds. Her quiet suffering spoke volumes, a language more potent than any spoken word. Secondary figures began to emerge from the periphery of his vision. Old man Kuya, his face a roadmap of ancient wisdom and suspicion, his presence a tangible representation of tribal law and custom. Then there was the merchant, a newcomer to the trading post, his gaze a greedy calculation, seeing only opportunity where Silas saw only desperation. These societal figures, embodying the rigid strictures of tradition and the callousness of opportunism, amplified the tension. They were the silent chorus, their unspoken judgments a constant pressure, pushing Silas towards a decision he deeply resented having to make. He was a man of the shadows, and now he was being dragged into the harsh, revealing light of public expectation, a place he had sworn never to return to. The simplicity of Luna's plea belied the profound complexities it had unleashed, not just within him, but within the subtle, intricate dynamics of this ancient community. Silas, a man who had mastered the art of evasion, found himself trapped, caught between the crushing weight of his past and the stark, immediate reality of Luna's innocent plea. He tried to articulate a refusal, a gentle but firm turning away, but the words withered on his tongue, brittle as dry leaves. The community's reaction was not overt hostility, but a subtle, pervasive pressure, like the slow, inexorable grind of a millstone. They spoke not with angry shouts, but with the quiet hum of expectation, a collective belief in a man's obligation, a primal call to honor. He felt their eyes, not condemning but observing, assessing his very soul. Old man Kuya, his voice like the rustle of ancient corn leaves, spoke of duty, of the delicate balance of life on the mesa, of the responsibility to protect the vulnerable. His words, though cloaked in tradition, carried the undeniable sting of reproach. The merchant, with his slick, oiled hair and calculating smile, offered his own solutions, thinly veiled propositions that reeked of exploitation, suggesting that Elena might work off her debts, a subtle, chilling insinuation of indentured servitude. Silas's gut tightened at the merchant's casual cruelty, a stark contrast to Luna's desperate purity. He saw the flash of something akin to shame, or perhaps a flicker of defiance, in Elena's deep-set eyes as she listened to the merchant's words. It was a fleeting moment, but it solidified a resolve within Silas, a primal rejection of injustice. This wasn't just about Luna's plea anymore. It was about the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of this world, where the strong preyed on the weak, and a woman, widowed and vulnerable, became a commodity. His own moral compass, long dormant, began to stir, a rusty needle twitching towards a true north he had long ignored. The internal struggle was profound, to maintain his carefully constructed solitude, or to step into the fray, to defend a family that was not his own, against forces that felt both ancient and terrifyingly modern. The desert, once his sanctuary, now felt like an arena, demanding a fight he had no desire to wage. His first attempt at resolution was, predictably, an evasion, a masterful retreat into the ambiguity that had long been his chosen terrain. He offered supplies, meager coins from his hidden stash, anything but the one thing they truly asked, himself. "The girl speaks from grief," he murmured, his voice rough, eyes fixed on a distant point on the horizon, refusing to meet Elena's steady gaze. "Her heart is burdened. It is not a request that can be honored by a man like me." He tried to frame it as a matter of his own unworthiness, a self-deprecating lie he had long perfected. But the words meant to deflect felt hollow, even to his own ears. He was a man of scars, inside and out, and the thought of grafting his desolate existence onto theirs, of bringing his inherent brokenness into their fragile hope, seemed an act of profound cruelty. A new obstacle emerged, not from the Zuni, but from within his own haunted memory. A sharp, almost physical pain pierced him, a flashback to the judgmental glare of his former community after the fire, the way they had whispered about his failure to save his family, their unspoken accusation that he was somehow cursed, tainted. This memory, raw and visceral, reaffirmed his conviction that he was a bringer of ruin, not solace. How could he, a man who had lost everything, a man branded by tragedy, possibly be the salvation this child sought? His very presence, he believed, would only invite further misfortune. This wasn't merely avoidance. It was a deeply ingrained self-preservation, twisted into a warped sense of protection for them. He saw the shadow of disappointment pass over Luna's face, a flicker of pain that twisted something deep within him. Elena remained stoic, her expression unreadable, but her silence was more potent than any accusation. It was a silent testament to their desperate plight, a quiet refusal to give up, an insistence that their plea was not simply a child's fancy, but a genuine cry for survival in a world that offered little mercy. The desert wind seemed to carry their unspoken needs, wrapping them around him like a shroud, tightening with every breath. The stakes, like the relentless desert sun, began to rise, intensifying with each passing moment. Luna, with the unyielding persistence of a small, tenacious weed pushing through cracked earth, did not give up. She appeared at the periphery of his desolate camp day after day, not speaking but simply observing him, her small frame a silent, poignant question mark against the vast canvas of the sky. Her quiet suffering mirrored in Elena's weary eyes, gnawed at Silas, a relentless, dull ache that penetrated his carefully constructed emotional armor. He saw Elena, bent over her small garden, coaxing life from the dry soil, her movements slow, deliberate, burdened by an invisible weight. He saw her dignity in destitution, her quiet fortitude in the face of insurmountable odds. This was not a family-seeking charity, but one desperately fighting to retain its integrity in a world that sought to strip it away. His own past, a landscape of scorched earth, began to press in with an unbearable force. He remembered, with vivid, agonizing clarity, the small, innocent face of his own daughter, consumed by flames he could not extinguish. The memory was a shard of glass in his heart, twisting with every beat. He had stood, paralyzed by fear and inadequacy, watching his world turn to ash. This profound failure, this indelible stain on his soul, was the source of his current emotional scars, the reason for his self-imposed exile. He saw his daughter's pleading eyes in Luna's, her small, trusting hand in the girl's outstretched one. The weight of his past failure, his inability to protect those he loved, suddenly felt inextricably linked to his present inaction. It was a cruel irony. His desire to protect them from his own perceived curse was now causing them deeper pain. The silence of the mesa, once a comfort, now felt like a vast, empty space amplifying his internal torment. Each grain of sand, each whisper of the wind, seemed to carry the echo of his past and the silent, desperate plea of the present. He was a man tethered to a tragic history, watching another tragedy unfold, powerless or perhaps simply unwilling to intervene. The brittle silence of the desert held a fragile mystery, one Silas had long avoided. Now the threads began to unravel, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet inevitability of a sunset. Old man Kuya, with the deliberate pace of time itself, chose a moment of shared quiet by the communal fire to weave a tale. He spoke of Elena's husband, a brave hunter, lost not to the wilderness but to a treacherous rockslide in the canyons, a place Silas knew intimately, a place where he himself had once sought solitude, a place of memory and regret. Then came the soft, almost imperceptible turn, the reveal, delivered not with accusation but with the weight of ancient knowledge. It was the time of the great rains, Kuya murmured, his gaze distant, when the earth shifted and the spirits of the rocks claimed their due. A solitary man, a stranger, was near, seeking shelter. He came, they say, to the edge of the canyon, just after the thunder's roar, and saw the dust rise where the hunter had fallen. Silas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He remembered that day, the sudden, violent downpour, the earth trembling beneath his feet. He had indeed been there, seeking a particular herb, a remedy for a lingering ailment, a solitary pursuit. He had heard the distant rumble, seen the dust, but had retreated, his own grief-stricken mind too consumed by its inner torment to investigate. He had turned away from the signs of disaster, prioritizing his own solitude over the call of the unknown. The irony was a bitter draught. He had been a witness, albeit an unwitting and absent one, to the very tragedy that now presented him with this impossible demand. His isolation had been a shield, but it had also blinded him. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had been present at the genesis of their loss, a silent, unseen specter. The metaphor was stark. His life, a landscape of missed connections and averted gazes, had finally converged with the very pain he had so meticulously avoided. The tension in the air was no longer just about Luna's plea, but about a deeper, tangled web of fate, a silent judgment that had been waiting for him, patiently in the heart of the desert. The confrontation, when it came, was not born of shouts, but of an unsettling quiet, a stillness that preceded a storm. It was the merchant, emboldened by the communal firelight and perhaps a few too many sips of potent brew, who broke the brittle peace. His voice, usually smooth, held an edge of predatory calculation. "The widow has need," he purred, his eyes flickering towards Elena. "And debts mount. A man of means such as our Mr. Silas could easily see to her welfare, unless, of course, he prefers to watch her struggle, a true burden on the community." His words, ostensibly about community welfare, dripped with thinly veiled contempt, a cruel challenge thrown into the fragile circle. He played on the societal bias against the vulnerable, against the woman who was now an unprotected asset, and against the outsider who refused to conform. Silas felt a cold rage seep into his bones, a slow, simmering fire. This was the raw, ugly truth of their world. Without a man, a family was adrift, easy prey. He looked at Elena, her face now starkly illuminated by the flickering flames, her eyes holding a deep, ancient pain, but also a fierce, unwavering dignity. Her quiet endurance was a testament, a silent accusation against the merchant's callousness. Old man Kuya, too, shifted, his gaze sharpening, a silent warning to the merchant, but also a silent pressure on Silas. The tension was palpable, a live wire humming in the darkness. Silas, a man who avoided conflict, found himself drawn into the arena, not by choice but by an innate moral imperative he had long suppressed. The merchant's words, a blunt, ugly instrument, had struck a chord, reverberating through his own history of witnessing injustice and failing to act. The silence that followed the merchant's declaration was not empty, but heavy with unspoken expectations, the weight of centuries of tradition, and the raw, desperate need of a small girl and her struggling mother. He felt the threads of his own past failures tightening around him, demanding a different response this time. The pivotal emotional climax began not with a roar, but with a whisper, a truth so fragile it threatened to shatter the very air. Silas stood before Elena and Luna, the weight of old man Kuya's revelation about the canyon heavy in his soul. He had seen the dust, yes, but had not known. He had been so lost in his own ocean of grief that another's shipwreck had been but a distant ripple. He looked at Luna, her small hand clutching the hem of her mother's worn skirt, her eyes mirroring the raw, innocent pain that had once consumed his own child's face. He saw the same fierce, protective love in Elena's eyes that he had failed to embody when fire consumed his world. The memory of the flames, the acrid smoke, the agonizing screams that had forever been etched into the walls of his mind, rose up, choking him. I was there," he rasped, the words tearing from his throat raw and unbidden. "Not in the canyon, but near. I heard the rocks. I saw the dust rise." His voice faltered, betraying the stoic facade he had carefully built. I turned away. This admission, stark and unadorned, was the ultimate self-condemnation, the breaking of his most guarded secret. It was not an excuse but a confession, a laying bare of his deepest flaw, his paralyzing fear of engaging with pain, his retreat into self-preservation at the cost of empathy. The silence that followed was immense, profound, filled only with the rhythmic beat of his own pounding heart. Elena's eyes, usually so guarded, softened, not with pity, but with a flicker of understanding, an unspoken recognition of shared human brokenness. Luna, sensing the shift, looked up at him, her gaze unwavering, not accusing, but seeking, still seeking. It was a terrifying moment of vulnerability, an open wound exposed, but within that raw honesty, a fragile bridge began to form between them. The repetition of "I turned away" echoed in his mind, each syllable a hammer blow against his carefully constructed wall of isolation, a wall that was now crumbling, brick by painful brick. The turning point was subtle, a shift in the desert wind, a change in the light, imperceptible to all but those whose souls were truly attuned. Silas's confession, a raw, bleeding wound laid bare, had not, as he feared, been met with condemnation, but with a quiet, profound understanding. Elena's gaze, previously an inscrutable mirror, now reflected a glimmer of shared human frailty, a recognition of burdens carried and losses endured. He saw, in her eyes, not judgment, but a fragile acceptance that began to mend the fractured pieces of his own spirit. He looked at Luna, her small face upturned, no longer merely begging, but watching him with a hopeful intensity that demanded more than just survival. It demanded a soul. He realized then that his pursuit of solitude had been a self-inflicted prison, a punishment he had devised for his own perceived failures. The irony was a bitter taste. By isolating himself from pain, he had also severed himself from the possibility of healing, from the very human connection that might offer solace. The path before him, once a landscape of bleak choices, suddenly clarified. It was not about erasing the past, for that was impossible. It was about choosing a different future, about extending a hand that had long been clenched in a fist of grief. His choice was a quiet one, made not with grand pronouncements, but with a simple, deliberate gesture. He reached out, his calloused hand, trembling slightly to gently touch Luna's hair, a silent acknowledgement of her plea, her courage, and her profound need. It was a commitment whispered into the vast, indifferent air, a promise forged in the crucible of his own pain, to step back into the currents of life, to face the uncertainty, to embrace the possibility of connection, however fragile. The darkness that had enveloped him for so long began to recede, a slow, reluctant retreat, allowing a hesitant, almost imperceptible sliver of dawn to break through the long, desolate night of his soul. Hope, a word he had forgotten, shimmered faintly on the horizon. The morning light, soft and hesitant, painted the mesa with hues of rose and gold, a stark contrast to the dramatic darkness that had long clung to Silas's world. His decision, whispered only to the wind and the silent earth, had set in motion a different kind of current. He watched Elena and Luna as they moved about their small dwelling, their quiet resilience a testament to the enduring human spirit. There was no grand celebration, no sudden erasure of their hardship, for the desert remained unforgiving, and life's scars ran deep. Yet a subtle shift had occurred. His presence, no longer that of a wary outsider, had become a quiet anchor. He worked the arid earth beside Elena, his strong hands once only skilled in lonely survival, now turning the soil with a shared purpose. He listened to Luna's hesitant stories, her small voice slowly gaining confidence, each word a fragile bloom in the barren landscape of his heart. The fear of recurrence, of bringing ruin, still lingered, a phantom limb that ached in the quiet moments. But now it was tempered by a new, unfamiliar sensation, the fragile warmth of connection, the quiet hum of belonging. The resolution was not a perfect ending, but a grounded, real beginning. He was still a man marked by flaws, burdened by memory, but he was no longer alone in his struggle. The Zuni community, observing from a respectful distance, seemed to offer a silent nod of acceptance, a recognition of his quiet commitment. The dark emotional tones that had defined his existence began to interweave with threads of cautious hope. He understood now that healing was not about forgetting, but about integrating the pain, about finding purpose in the brokenness. The metaphor of the desert was complete. Just as life found a way to bloom in the most desolate places, so too could hope, fragile but resilient, take root in a heart long parched by grief. He had not sought this path, but in the small, desperate plea of a Zuni girl, he had found a reason to walk it.